after yesterday, as you can imagine, a group of us sat down to talk about how we could respond to many of the requests that we heard quite clearly to try to better visualize what the framework question was all about. You know, we heard many people saying, why are you, what's the rationale for presenting a more ambitious framework? How does this fit in with the history of sanitation waterfall and its original focus? And it brought to mind a conversation that we had had several years ago at the preparatory meetings for the 2010 high-level meeting. And we'd been in a meeting in a restaurant at which we were, you know, sort of all talking and waving our hands around. And we wanted to draw a diagram, but we didn't have any paper. And so we drew the diagram using plates. Okay, and so I'm going to show you the plate diagram, and I'm going to put it out there to see if this helps with some of the visualization. And Dominic may recognize this because I think he was the one who came up with the plates. So we started with a big plate. We found the biggest plate on the table that we could find, and we said, these are all the countries in the world. And then we found a smaller plate. I think it was like, you know, a bread plate. And we said, these are all the countries that have large unserved populations, large populations without water and sanitation. And then we got a saucer, a saucer from a teacup. And we said, and these are the countries with large unserved populations who are badly off track to reach the MDGs. And we felt strongly that at that point in the history of the partnership, that we wanted to focus on those badly off-track countries. Many of them are from sub-Saharan Africa. Many of them are represented here in this room today. And the first two high-level meetings, as you know, have been very much focused on the dialogue between those countries that are badly off-track for reaching their MDGs on water and sanitation and who have large unserved populations. And the dialogue is between them and the donors that want to make that a priority or who feel that they should make that a priority. So I think that the conversation that we were having yesterday was about how we maintain the focus on the red saucer, but now start to look at the blue bread plate. And there are three reasons that we might want to look at the blue bread plate. One is that we know there is possible South-South learning to be achieved. That there are countries in that blue circle who have, without having to become dependent on donor funds, have already started making great moves towards serving their populations, and that there may be things to learn there. This may also include countries that in the past have had large unserved populations and who have now managed to serve them. The second reason is that the global monitoring framework affects the countries in both the red saucer and the blue bread plate. So if we want to look at rationalizing the global monitoring framework, we'd have to work with both of those groups. And the third reason is that one of the stated priorities of water and, sanitation water for all is to improve the way resources are used. In the case of the countries in the red circle, that includes both their own national government, the national budgets, and donor funds. And this is why aid targeting and aid effectiveness is such a big part of the red circle. But the countries in blue, many of them, though they may not be highly dependent on donor funds, are actually looking for help and guidance on how to use their own national budgets more effectively. So I think one of the things that we were trying to articulate in the vision paper for the framework is how we might maintain the original intention of Sanitation Water for All with its focus on the countries in that red circle, while starting to engage countries in the blue in order to achieve some of those additional objectives.
My presentation is basically focusing on experience sharing, and most of the questions which were raised yesterday, if you go through this presentation, may be able to be answered in one way or another. So, given the time I have, I think better listen than read the slides, because we'll not be able to finish the slides as time goes on. So, we are looking at country sector annual reviews. Remember yesterday there was even a question, is sector reviews one of the tools to be able to measure performance? So we are saying that in Uganda we are having these sector reviews, and they were started in 2001, and at least every year in October we have approximately 200 participants who come and attend these sector reviews, and they include government officials, donor partners, political leaders, and sector ministries. So what do we look at? In these reviews, the focus is on one, overall annual performance assessment of the sector. We also look at resource allocation, accountability, and transparency, and to enhance involvement with stakeholders, the primary ones we have Ministry of Education, Ministry of Health, development partners to come together to see how the sector is performing and the challenges the sector is going through and the good practices that can be taken forward. So these, the sector reviews are basically chaired by the political side, the Minister of Water and Environment chairs, and then keynote addresses are given by the other ministers. So it is a government-led monitoring system. Then, of course, establishing it was not very easy. We have been down for at least 10 years, okay? But how did it come about? We are saying that nationally there was the desire for more efficient investment and effective outcomes from the processes, from the resources allocated to social sectors. So this need for accountability, effectiveness, is the one which led to the country reforms, and then at the end of the day, we had to look at what we are saying, the sector-wide approach. That means putting resources together. So, ladies and gentlemen, yesterday we were asking, is there a way, is there a mechanism of how resources can be put together? So we are saying donor funding comes in as a basket to supplement government budgets, and that's how we have managed to go by the sector-wide approach. We are no longer going project-oriented. Yeah, at the end of this review, we have agreed minutes. What we are saying, it's like a planning process where now we agree on where do we take forward. So we take about 7 to 8 agreed actions, and the Minister of Water and Environment coordinates all the preparations for this sector. So these agreed minutes are really key in planning, and that every year we have to come back and say, we agreed on A, B, C, D. Have you achieved it? Like, an example is, we looked at the sector and we are doing very badly in operation and maintenance of the facilities. So in this meeting, we said strengthen the community-based maintenance system through formation of hand pump mechanics associations by the year 2013. But as we talk now, we have formed associations in all districts to support the operation and maintenance. Sanitation, we never used to have a budget line for sanitation. It is through these reviews that they said now sanitation should stand out separate. We need a budget line and we need money for sanitation. And at the end of the year, it was achieved, okay? Then, so each year we have this performance report, which we discuss to bring out. We measure all inputs, outputs, processes, okay? Everything that is measured in here, and that is corrected right from the bottom up to the national level. So what do we look at in this? We look at access. Are we really moving forward? Percentage of people within 1 kilometer or 0.2. We look at functionality, percentage of improved sources that are functional. Now, the issue here was more money was being put in new investments, but is it really worth putting money in more investment, new investments when the old facilities are not functioning? So at the end of the day, you count coverage, counting even those which are not functioning. So we said no. We look at functionality and we see now from this meeting we are saying no. We need now to focus more on revitalizing all the schemes than going in for new, so that we can do what? We can have increased coverage by revitalizing that one. Value for money is, are we doing investments? Are they resulting into what is expected of it, okay? Average cost per beneficiary of a new water source. Then access in sanitation. Quantity, cumulative water. We look at equity. Are we serving the population equally? If there is no, now through these meetings, okay, it was realized that some areas were underserved. So the allocation formula for resources was changed to focus on the low coverage areas. So as they get more funds, while those coverage areas with high coverage, they get less funds, so that those ones at low coverage can come up to the level until they meet these other areas. So that one was also an outcome. Gender, management of water facilities in terms of gender, and then water resources management. So yesterday when you are arguing about the outcomes being 9, in Uganda we are measuring 11. Success factors, I think the most important thing. How did the system start and the success? Initially, when we were starting this performance measurement, we had one, government leadership of the sector, existence of sector coordination framework with a sector working group. So we have working groups, water and sanitation working group, operation and machinery working group. So that's one of the same. Then the sector-wide approach, that means putting funds together, and then as a government, you cut the cake based on the needs of the what? Of the sectors, okay? Annual target setting, we set targets per year, and if we don't meet them, then we are asking ourselves, why are we not meeting the targets? What needs to be done? Does it meet capacity building, increasing resources? So, linking the reviews to the annual budgeting process, and then increase level of transparency and accountability. Now, there are still challenges. You can't just expect food just on a plate. Now, institutionalizing of the process was difficult because when it was being initiated, the government people thought that it was a precondition for donors to put in funds. Until they had to get the benefits after some time, then they realized that no, I think it's a worthwhile agenda to take forward. Transparency. Initially, there was also that kind of holding on to information, because now we are saying information has to be shared by the stakeholders, different ministries, to know what is happening, what are the challenges, and how the government is being served. But because other people wanted to hold on to the information, it became a bit difficult. But after 2 to 3 years, people became open and they saw the benefits of the monitoring system. The complexity of indicators, there we have some indicators which are difficult to measure up to now. When you start talking about equity, how do you measure? Then functionality, the issue is, at what point do you count a source to be non-function? You go there today, it is functioning. You count it as functioning. 1 week down the road, it is not functioning. So what do you record that one? So at the end of the year, what are you going to record? Today's seeing or tomorrow's seeing? Today it is working, tomorrow it is not working. But they want a report at the end of the what? So it became a bit problematic, but it has helped us in that we have stuck to it, and last year we had to say sources which have not been functioning for the last 5 years, abandon them and count them as non-existent. And that one has caused us to say our coverage has come down by 1%. But we are going now to work towards improving it further. Cooperation between different ministries was limited initially until the establishment of the sanitation subsector working group. And then inconsistency and unreliable data. So when you are promoting or your institution starting this process, you have to be very careful about the data. Because initially, some people would give, because they knew that now allocation of resources depended on data, some districts were giving us less data to attract more funding. So today, this year, you give a source, 100 sources functioning, or 100 sources, you give coverage as 70%. Next year, you give coverage as 60%. Then the question is, have you eaten some other sources? See? So because you wanted more money, you change. So the data is very important. How the reliability, the source, all must be put into consideration. Time management. We are saying every October you must have this meeting. So please, resources must be there to be able to run the what? The review session, which counts for about 200 people at one sitting. Then to a large extent, there's still reliance on external consultant support. We still go in for consultant services to make the report, to review, to do everything until everything comes to the table. So ladies and gentlemen, that's the experience. And in my conclusion, I'm saying performance reviews, I think, is one of the tools that can make us move once it is taken up by the government. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. And thanks very much for David for setting up this next presentation, which comes back very much to country processes and country systems for monitoring. But I'm actually going to start with the global monitoring tools. And the reason why we're having this before the breakout sessions is because monitoring is so critical for all three of SWA's main activities: the prioritization of political leadership and monitoring the commitments that are made, the generating of strong evidence, of course, and strengthening of national frameworks. Now, there are many global and regional monitoring initiatives, which we already saw a little about yesterday, but they are bringing real innovation and real learning. And I'm going to go through each of these briefly, just to mention a couple of the main innovation and learning points that each have brought. The Joint Monitoring Program continues to evolve, has brought us great innovations like ladders. There's been lots of discussion about ladders, but they are really helpful. And there's a picture of a ladder there, a service ladder, improved in the dark green, then shared in the light green, unimproved in the light brown, and open defecation in the brown. And these ladders, these sanitation ladders, have really helped us understand a lot about the trends in countries, across countries, and when combined with poverty analysis, have really been a very, very powerful tool. So two examples of the type of learning that we've gained from these is by visualizing this data, seeing how China has driven a piped water strategy for its increase in coverage for water supply, whereas India has relied more on a point source practice. Another example is Bangladesh's very equitable improvements in sanitation. We've seen the improvements across all quintiles. So the point here is that great learning from a global mechanism. Things are developing. Glass has brought innovations, and really not just brought innovations, but helped everyone discuss and negotiate and build consensus around, particularly tracking of ODA flows. It's now the report that, if you like, the verdict on whether flows are being matched with need, whether that's happening or not. But equally is bringing innovations like the uptake to the right of water and sanitation, and equally the lesson from that it's difficult to discern. We need to be more discerning about the ability of citizens to claim rights. We can't just ask whether it's possible to claim rights. The SANs, not specifically a monitoring tool. This is Africa SAN, SACO SAN, EA SAN. They're not specifically a monitoring tool, but a couple of innovations they've brought that are related to monitoring are the ministerial commitments and the country self-assessment process on progress. So that is a monitoring thing. But equally, the learning from that has been the need to really follow up national action plans and to do that continuously. Then there's the country status overviews, the AMCAO country status overviews. An innovation, I hope, now becoming iconic is the service delivery pathways and the scoring of those. But also the fact that the country status overviews went to difficult countries, fragile states and resource-rich countries, and helped kickstart the policy dialogue there. Equally, the main learning point from that has been just how important it is to shift from projects to country-led programs in order to achieve scale and sustainability, particularly in larger countries. It really showed and demonstrated with a solid database of 32 countries over 20 years that this is what needed to happen. But this cycle of innovation and learning is just too slow. It's giving us it's allowing course corrections over a 5 to 10 year period. It's like the long route of accountability, right? You remember the World Development Report 2004, which talked about the short route of accountability and the long route of accountability, the long route of accountability being through politicians and the political process. But this learning's having to go through the international process. And that means that it's really a long learning cycle. It's also, from this data, very difficult to identify causes for trends. We've got a great debate going on in WSP about whether Thailand's progress in sanitation is because of GDP or the approach that they took post their recession in the mid-80s. And we can't unpick it. It's incredibly difficult to unpick these things. And moreover, this attention on global systems is not encouraging the development of country systems. I'm so thankful for David talking before, but why are we always asking Uganda to come and talk about country systems? That's the challenge. We need, the idea of joint sector reviews has been around for a while, and yet it's still Uganda who come to most of these meetings and talk about the joint sector review process. The paper put out by Kirsten last year, or this year, whenever it was, again, Uganda, it's still new, it's still fresh. So we need to accelerate sector learning. We need to increase support for national and subnational monitoring systems. We need to move to more standardized collaborative monitoring mechanisms. We need much higher resolution in monitoring data. I'm going to come back to this point briefly. And we need rigorous evaluation linked to binding joint sector review processes. And Uganda still remains one of the only places where that is happening, and I would contend even that has slightly lost its momentum. What do we mean by high resolution? This is literally high resolution. In Liberia, it's water point mapping, and it's also a very good example of SWA collaboration. It has the fingerprints of many different organizations. UNICEF, Water for People, Gates, who were funding Water for People for doing this, UNDP, WSP, and of course, it was led by the government of Liberia. Now, the thing about high resolution is that it allows us to begin to link outputs to funding and the implementation modalities, which increases transparency. It allows us to evaluate those modalities and then, hopefully, to shift money into the modalities that are working best. So what we need is monitoring and evaluation for all. No, we're not going to start a new initiative, don't worry. But there's a serious point here. The first is that we do really need to support the national and subnational systems. But the second point of standardizing data collection is really important. There are so many times when a donor requires an organization, or it's standard for a donor to require an organization to monitor its own outputs. Isn't that strange, though? Why do donors ask those organizations that are doing the work to monitor themselves? Moreover, the data that's produced is generally regarded as useless to anybody else in the sector. That's a pretty hopeless situation to be in. What we want is organizations to be generating data which anybody in the sector can use. So if UNICEF generates a whole load of data from their programming, then government should be able to suck that in to their monitoring systems, along with data that's generated by WaterAid from their programming and UNDP from their programming. And ideally, you want then the GLASS report or any regional mechanisms to suck in that same data into a global report. But the problem is data is so non-standard at the moment that it's regarded more or less as useless as soon as it comes out of the organizations that we're working in. And that needs to change, because we need to use that evidence and build consensus for strong policy dialogue, and we need to get back and institute these joint sector reviews with binding commitments throughout the world. Thank you.
Whilst I was watching Clarissa's teacups, something occurred to me. Okay, I'm struggling to get the... Right, just a couple of bits of data that's just data out there to consider as part of the teacups, that 80% of those without sanitation live in middle-income countries. So when you look at that's a very interesting statistic. And then the other thing I thought of was the in terms of open defecation, Brazil is Bangladesh, which is also another interesting statistic. You can draw your own conclusions. Let me start on this session, however, and thank you for that introduction, Bert. And as you can see, we're working very closely with UN Water and UN DESA on this. But the purpose of this whole thing is to unravel the kind of UN speak around this whole post-2015 agenda, but to also present it in a way where we can actually have a good discussion on what the entry points are for either SWA as a partnership or the members within it to contribute, influence the whole agenda. So I think that's the purpose of it. It is just putting as much information as we know in front of you to enable you to achieve that. Pour les francophones, la présentation en anglais, c'est un peu différent que la présentation en français que vous avez sur papier. Et c'est le même contenu, mais j'ai un peu enlevé les détails du présentation en anglais, parce que les anglophones ne sont pas aussi doués que vous. Alors j'ai cru que ce sera plus facile pour comprendre. Mais vous avez toutes les informations sur le papier que vous avez. Mais je m'excuse, mais la présentation, je vais le donner en anglais. Okay, exactly. Thank you, yeah, thanks a lot. Okay, let me go on to the actual presentation. Is it working? Try it. Testing. Okay, yeah. Thank you. Okay, so on the post-2015 consultation, the why are we consulting on it? One of the things about the MDG framework was that it wasn't widely consulted on. It was something that was presented and accepted, and then countries and stakeholders were asked to buy into it. This time around, in terms of the post-2015, what everybody is very keen on is that there is a very a framework that is widely consulted on, that people who normally don't have inputs to this kind of thing, so people outside the bureaucracies, outside the groups of experts, have a chance to contribute, particularly from developing countries and particularly from civil society in developing countries. So that's, I think, a very positive note to start forming a future agenda on. I think what's important as well is that we don't forget the unfinished agendas of the MDG development framework. The first and most important detail, I think, is that at the moment, as the process is evolving, there are two separate tracks. Now, everybody would want those separate tracks to come together, and I'm sure they will, but at the moment, they are separate. And the first track is the one Bert, or comes out of the Rio conference that Bert was alluding to, which is that a group of member states are tasked with taking the outcomes of the Rio conference and working out how that will form part of the future sustainable development agenda. So that's one track, and it hasn't progressed very far because there are structural issues on who should be doing it and so on. But it is evolving, and it will be one of the two main tracks. The second track is the one that most of the time we are talking about, which is the, if you like, the bureaucracy of the UN. So the UN Secretary General led track. The UN Secretary General has to report to the General Assembly in 2013 on the MDGs and on a process to follow the MDGs. And he has put in place a number of things to advise him on how to do it. And it's in that context that the high-level panel and the global conversation, of which the thematic consultation is part. That's all part of the process to advise the Secretary General. Now, there's no reason why the outputs of some of these can't be used for the other track as well. So the idea is to try and bring these two tracks as close as possible together. But for my part, I'll be talking exclusively about the first UN Secretary General-led track, because that's what we are part of, and that's the one that is actually moving very fast. In terms of structure, there are two key elements to it, and there are many parts of it, but I just want to boil it down to the basics. The first is the high-level panel, and that's a group of 26 eminent people who have been appointed to this panel, and there are 3 co-chairs: Indonesia, the presidents of Indonesia and Liberia, and the Prime Minister of the UK. Of course, they're representing not just their constituencies, but they are there as eminent people representing their views, if you like, and collective wisdom. In WASH terms, a number of them are very favorable to water in particular, and WASH within that. So that's important to bear in mind. The second element is this global conversation. So remember, this is the consultation bit. This is addressing any criticism that, unlike the MDG agenda, the future framework will be based on inputs from everybody. And one of the key elements to that are what are called the country consultations, and I'll mention that in more detail, and the global thematic consultations. And there is significant online components for these consultations, which is, again, a recognition that not everyone can make it to big, expensive meetings. And UNDP and UNDESA are kind of the secretariat that are leading these consultations for the UN system. This is trying to put it in a timeline, and I'll start from the bottom, right? The bottom is the clear message: we're still in the current MDG framework, there's lots of work to do, we shouldn't forget that, and we should continue doing those things that need to be done. The global conversation I mentioned are the country consultations and the global thematic consultations, of which there are 11 themes. There are themes like inequalities, health, education, environment, and now, largely thanks to the efforts of UN Water as well. And the thing is to notice is the very short arrow. In the whole scheme of things, that is a very short time frame. Similarly, there are 50 country consultations that will take place around the world. I'll say a bit more about that. And then there's the high-level panel, and they will report to the Secretary General in about June or July to enable him to then take their advice to report to the General Assembly. So the global and country consultations are meant to inform the high-level panel as well. So we've got the shortest time frame for these two things. If you go up to the Rio outcomes, so Rio plus 20 occurred in June 2012, and there's a track along that will develop. We don't know the exact milestones, but that will happen. And then there are key milestones such as the MDG Review Summit, the UN General Assembly in 2013, which is where key decisions will be made, not so much on content, but certainly on process, informed by all these things. And then the process will go on and on until, I think, the General Assembly in 2015, where the new framework will be decided upon. So it's quite complicated, it's quite elaborate, things are evolving, but it's good to have that big picture in mind. Country consultations are exactly what they are. What are the issues in a country? What are the things affecting poor people in those countries? And what do they think should be taken up by a global agenda? So it's just about getting voices, and particularly voices of the poor, heard. 50 countries are part of this, and those are the 50. Okay, so large, you can recognize some of them. South Africa's in there. A lot of the countries present in and members of SWA are in there, but a lot of others as well. Okay, the thematic consultations, and that's what Bert referred to in his introduction, because we, UNICEF, along with UN Water and UN DESA, have the privilege of co-leading this. There are 11 of these thematic consultations, so we're one of 11, and we're a late entry because there were 9 before that, and water was not one of them. And the aim of these are not so much to get concrete targets and indicators, but to highlight the issues and the kind of, big questions, such as, do we think there should be a water goal? And within that, what are the key issues that should be covered in such a goal? And there's no blueprint for these consultations. There are some guidelines. We are aware of what other consultations are doing, like health and education, and inequalities in particular. And we're using that as a guide. One of the key things is looking back at the MDG framework. So it's not just looking forward in a kind of vacuum, looking back at what happened to the MDGs and drawing lessons from that. As I mentioned, a lot of online content, and that is to make it accessible, but also to recognizing the time frame as well, that it is a short time frame to achieve a lot. And within the way it will be structured, within that there'll be different conversations and different streams, as Bert mentioned, but also within those streams, different themes or issues being discussed at different points, and then coming together at the end. And the idea is that there will be a preliminary meeting in The Hague in March, at which the outcomes will be discussed. And then it feeds into the high-level panel process that feeds into the Secretary General's report. So that's some of, just to give you a flavor of what it might look like. www.theworldwewant, or worldwewant2015.org is, and that's up and running already. That's where all the consultations are. And within that, there are these buttons, which are the thematic consultations. And the one in water, because it's not live yet, but it will be live by about Friday, there is a faded icon there. So there is an icon already, which is a start. Right, and if you press on the icon, I didn't do this, by the way, so I don't know what's happening next. But if you press on the icon, that's the kind of thing you'll have. So you'll have, and the idea is to make it fun and participatory. So try and make it, we're trying to make it light on long, heavy papers, and try and get information and across and discussions going through things like video clips, very short papers, and so on and so forth. So anyway, there's a whole team working on that, but I think we can do with a lot of your help in how to make it even more fun and participatory. Okay, so that's then how, we could have issues like voting on, what is more readily available throughout the globe, clean water or Coca-Cola, just things like that gets things going. So it's not quite the kind of expert consultations that many of you are used to. And there are feeds on Facebook and Twitter, and even from this meeting, and Carried Winds on top of this, a lot of stuff is going out there as information. Many of you are very familiar with the JMP consultations, and one of the big questions is, under the JMP, we kind of went very quickly and started on this, an expert consultation on targets and indicators. This actually is part of the water thematic consultation, and we have to make it part of it, obviously. But it's not the only piece of it. And I think one of the tricks, if you like, we have to do is to make sure that the JMP consultation, because so much good thinking and good quality stuff is in there, that we obviously will not lose it, but we have to make sure that it's part of this without it being seen as a kind of a cooked up thing, because it isn't. It's an expert consultation. And this is how the timeline for the global thematic consultation will run. Those are milestones for the high-level panel, and their big one is reporting in May, June to the Secretary General. We started in about October, which is very late, and the consultation will basically be set up through November and December. And the online consultation, therefore, will proceed January to February. There'll already be things in November and December that people can contribute because it's going live on Friday. The analysis and synthesis will happen in parallel, and then there's the March meeting in The Hague. And I'm sure it'll go on and on and on in different guises. So finally, how can you get involved? First of all, be informed. There's lots of materials around, and there'll be more and more. Mobilize your partners, and that's into the country consultations as well as the global thematic consultations. Make sure people are aware and do contribute. Advocate for water goals and WASH outcomes within that, or whatever you feel is important. And get online, and the key thing is country ownership. This is not something that should be perceived as being driven by experts or by donors, but things that are coming from countries and from poor people. I think I'll conclude on that. This is just a slide to say there's a lot going on from this meeting that is being fed through as well. So it's a live dialogue. It's not static. It's very different, and this is, I think, the main message. It's very different to the kind of dreary, drab, heavy process consultations that we're used to, but the emphasis is on consultation rather than the output. That's my view anyway.